Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson. We're continuing our study of 2nd Peter. We're in chapter 2. We're going to pick up with verse 10, which is really in the middle of the sentence, and we're going to read through verse 16 today. Peter in chapter 2 is taking on directly the false teachers, not so much by debating with them, although we gather the falsehoods that he's addressing because of the truths that he emphasizes, that Jesus is divine, that the second coming is going to happen, that you have to be careful when you read the Apostle Paul and pay attention to what he's written, because some of his passages are easy to misconstrue. I mean, he's going to mention all these things in the book, but what he's focusing on, what he's emphasizing in chapter 2 are the way these people act and the fact that God will judge, that judgment is going to be certain, and it's going to be severe because too much is at stake. So we're going to pick up with verse 10. He's already mentioned two characteristics that we often find in false teachers. One is immorality, and particularly sexual immorality or the immorality of the appetites. Maybe it's chemical addiction or sexual misconduct in some way, but the immorality of the appetites. And the second is the money, the greed of it all. And we know enough of sex scandals in religious figures almost any week that we live to know that these are more often than not a factor in what's going on. But there are others. In fact, we're going to have a list today that is the photographic negative of the list we have in chapter 1 of those good attributes. So let's read verses 10 through 16. Especially those who indulge the flesh in its corrupt desires and despise authority, daring, self-willed. They do not tremble when they revile angelic majesties, whereas angels, who are greater in might and power, do not bring a reviling judgment against them before the Lord. But these, like unreasoning animals, born as creatures of instinct to be captured and killed, reviling, where they have no knowledge, and will in the destruction of those creatures also be destroyed, suffering wrong as the wages of doing wrong. They count it a pleasure to revel in the daytime. They are stains and blemishes, reveling in deceptions as they carouse with you, having eyes full of adultery that never cease from sin, enticing unstable souls, having a heart trained in greed, accursed children, forsaking the right way they have gone astray, having followed the way of Balaam, the son of Beor, who loved the wages of righteousness, but he received rebuke for his own transgression. For a dumb donkey, speaking with the voice of a man, restrained the madness of this prophet. Well, we have reinforced the note of judgment, and we have broadened the list of characteristics that we often find in false teachers. There's disrespect. There's excessive behavior all around. There is manipulation. Especially manipulation of people susceptible to being manipulated, people who are weak, people who are uninformed. And then there is the persistence of it. And these things end up being a photographic negative of what he's talked about. Persistence, stubbornness instead of patience, and manipulation instead of brotherly kindness, and adultery instead of moral excellence. I mean, I haven't made the list and tried to find antitheses, but I ought to. I mean, I suspect that one could, because we have these photo negatives in the false teachers, and so when we see, just glee in irreverence and disrespect, when we see pleasure in taking advantage of others, when we see moral excess, when we see greed, when we see all these things, we can immediately doubt and call into question the teaching of such a person. We've talked about how Jewish this is, but it's also very Greek as well. Plato talked about a communicator having to have logos, pathos, and ethos. They have to have reason, and they have to they have to appeal to not only reason but also emotion. But they have to be qualified to speak. They have to have ethos. They have to be someone you can trust to speak to you. And and Peter is really following these categories. These folks do not have ethos. They do not have gravitas. They do not have the right to speak, and therefore you should not listen to them because they have disqualified themselves as communicators by their behavior. Also, the whole business of animals, and we love animals. You love animals, and I love animals, and just nearly everyone, except my grandma Browning, loves animals. So why is he using animals in this way? Well, he kind of ties this middle section together, and he's using an Aristotelian notion about the difference between animal intelligence and human intelligence. And Aristotle taught that humans have self-awareness. In a way, an animal does not have self-awareness, and therefore humans have self-control. In a way, animals do not have self-control. And these impulses that are instinctual in an animal and fine and right and natural in an animal cannot be trusted in a human being. A human being has self-awareness and therefore must exercise impulse control. And I just think that's biblical. I think that's what we see. Satan has taken the godly instincts that we have, that all living beings have, the instinct for self-preservation, the instinct to reproduce, the instinct to feed ourselves, and he has warped all those things and turned them into lust and greed, and therefore we cannot obey our instincts except for one, that is the impulse for compassion, which Jesus continued to have, and which we're told to have, and which Satan has not been able to warp. And Peter is saying, in comparing us to animals, is saying we can't live by instinct the way they do. But these guys, they're obeying their impulses, they're obeying their instincts. And then this middle section concludes with the example of an animal, Balaam and the donkey. Balaam has gone off to prophesy against God's people, even though he knows it's false, because he's being paid to. And he gets stopped in the way because there's an angel waiting in a way to kill him. And his donkey is given the power of speech and keeps running him into the wall in order to make him stop. And he realizes that he can't just do that and the donkey saves his life. And so, that episode really ties together all the themes that we've already talked about. And so it's the perfect way to conclude this middle section. In verses 17 through 22, he's going to talk about the results of false teaching and give us another final word of judgment, really, directed at these false teachers. We'll pick up with verse 17 next time. Thank you for joining me for another nearly 9 good minutes with the Word.